Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Creating a Winning Pitch Deck, presented by Early Growth Financial Services. My name is Amanda Young, and I'll be your moderator today from the EGFS team. I just have a few quick notes before we get started. The webinar will last about an hour, and that includes time at the end for questions and discussion. We'll also take questions throughout the webinar, so please feel free to type those into the control panel, and I'll read them out to Sirk and Alaa so they can answer them. The next thing to note is that this webinar will be recorded and sent to all the registrants with the slide deck within 48 hours. You can also find this recording and all of our recordings on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/earlygrowth. Now, before I pass this off to our speakers, I'd just like to tell everybody a bit about Early Growth. This is a quote from our founder, David Ehrenberg, and a couple of the clients we've worked with. And here's a brief description of our services. We are an outsourced finance and accounting firm. We work with early stage companies, and we help them with everything from day-to-day accounting to financial forecasts to taxes and valuations. And then this is just a quick outline of everything we're going to go over today. It's pretty much the basic pitch deck that we recommend for founders. And so I will pass this off to Sirk and Alaa to introduce themselves and take it from here.
Hi everyone, this is Sirk Rowe, and I'm a consulting CFO with Early Growth. I've been with the firm for about 5 years, and prior to this, I came up to Silicon Valley after business school in 1996. Worked with a couple of bigger companies, 3Com Networks and Palm Computing. Before moving over into the startup and early stage company landscape. I've been working and supporting early stage companies, venture-backed companies, basically ever since. And so have a fair amount of experience with understanding and helping companies at this stage trying to grow, including obviously fundraising assistance as well. So thank you very much for your time today. Looking forward to this.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending. My name is Alaa Ismail. I am a consulting CFO with Early Growth. I've been with the firm approaching 9 years now, and I've been in technology and startup companies for about 18 years. And really have dealt with all kinds of companies in various stages, from very startup to kind of mid-market level. And I've done quite a bit of fundraising with a lot of these companies as well. So let me kind of get this started. Our presentation really revolves around Guy Kawasaki's guidance, and really the basis of his guidance is just to keep it simple. And we think that that's probably the most effective approach. We like to consult with all our companies and tell them to follow the 10-20-30 rule, which is just simply try to keep it to 10 slides, no longer than 20 minutes, and use large font. Some of the background to that. 10 slides kind of focuses your message. When you look at the 10 slides and you're preparing them, the tendency initially is just to kind of spew as much information onto your presentation as possible. But then when you think about the 10 slides, it focuses you to keep it at the 10 most important points. 20 minutes is really the attention span in most of your audiences. You don't want to make it any longer than that, because keep in mind, the idea is to spur conversation, not to show everybody how great your presentation skills are, or the graphics or anything. The primary reason for the presentation is to spur interest and begin conversations. And 30-point font keeps the slide simple and keeps you from putting too much information to the slide. The reader tends to get lost when there's small print and lots of bullet points.
And we also encourage charts and visuals, if you can, over prose on the slides.
Exactly. When I was looking at this slide and when we were going over, Sirk, Amanda and I were going over this yesterday, I thought, wow, this is very simple. I get to just say, hey, your first slide should be the title. Then I kind of thought about it overnight, and this tends to be the stage in the presentation where that I feel is most important. It's not just about giving a background on your organization name, your name, and the contact info, and how people could get a hold of you afterwards, and a brief elevator pitch. But it's really your opportunity to capture their attention, not just go over these simple points, but to really kind of grab your audience as to what you are going to be presenting to them. So that initial kind of information is really secondary. It's the excitement, tone, and atmosphere that you create that makes that's essentially my message for this #1 slide in your presentation for the title, to kind of introduce yourself and to start it off on a good footing. Sirk?
Okay, yeah. So the next one is if we move forward, and this is obviously an example, but as we move forward, then the next slide is going to be talking about what the problem is, right, and what the opportunity is. And so this is where you discuss whether through a quick personal, when you're doing the actual presentation, you might want to just talk about a personal experience or what have you. But this is where you state the problem that you're trying to solve, and you try to put it as plainly as possible. If you can go to the next slide, Amanda. So this is one for Airbnb, for example, and you can see that the problem is that that price is an important consideration for customers. That hotels leave you disconnected from the city, and there's really no way to book a room with a local or become a host. And so Airbnb saw this problem, stated it in a very, very high level format, which obviously makes it easy for someone to looking at this saying, okay, I get it. And I think that this is a good way to at least start the discussion of what we are trying to do as a company. Value proposition. So once we've actually stated the problem, then what we need to do is we need to think about what the solution is, right, and or the technology, and how we're going to go about doing it. And so this is where we state what we're doing or how we're approaching the problem to fix the to resolve the situation, and to make our customers happy, and obviously paying us money. And so if we could go to the next slide, you can see another example. And the way that this this presentation is structured is basically just using some examples of slides that we've seen from other presentations, from other pitch decks that are that portray the message really, really well. And so again, you'll see again a very, very high level solution slide that basically says, hey, look, our solution allows us customers to save money when traveling, make money when you're hosting, and to share a culture, right? And so again, very, very simple. It grabs the attention of the reader, because really the goal of all of these slides is really to get the interest of the reader piqued, right? So that they want to take the next step, right? They want to take the meeting, and they want to spur conversation with you about what we're trying to do. Here's another example of a solution slide, for a company called Go Saily. And you can see that that there's basically two sides of this. There's a creating a boat owners community, and then there's an infrastructure and a platform it being established to allow bookings and secure transactions.
So in the fourth slide is really the where you get a chance to give them the secret sauce. What is the magic of our product? We've laid out the problems and how we are going to plan to address them. And here's an opportunity of how we will do it and how do we differentiate ourselves. So here we go over the simple points of, what we're going to do, the product that we're going to create, the service that we're going to offer, and the technology that we're going to create. Here's also the chance for you to kind of give a cadence of how your business approach or your business methodology will be. What will be the first stage, second stage, third stage of your development cycle. It kind of sets the basis of discussion on either if you're in a technology stage or if you're a service company, really what you're going to be doing and how you're going to differentiate yourself. Next slide, please. This is an example of an example of how you present your differentiation. In this case, you have a product. So you in a very graphic form, you're telling the reader or the person who is listening to your presentation what you're going to do. You're going to browse for details. You're going to compare reviews and prices, and then you're going to select and pay. Now, these are kind of the bullet points, but underneath it, you also will be discussing the business, how you're planning to monetize, for example, could very easily go into the product presentation. And one small point up top here is these two patents pending slide. It's a chance for a very simple area on your slide to kind of identify the barrier of entry as well. Say we have 2 patents out there, so this is not going to be easily copied, and we have barriers of entry for competition. So it kind of leads to the follow-up slides that address competition. Next slide, please. Another example here of how our product works. This is kind of, in my opinion, maybe too busy, because on the right-hand side of the slide, there's a lot of little numbers, but I don't really think that that's the message. Really, the message is on the left-hand side. I think this concentrating on the stuff on the left and while highlighting certain graphics on your presentation is also very, very effective in because a lot of times in technology you're presenting to very, very technical people who are aware of your product. So to the extent that the discussion follows, you have the graphics to be able to explain further.
This also kind of points to the fact that we're not just kind of talking at a very, very high level. We have very, very specific ideas of the stacks that are involved in making this work, and this is kind of showing that that we understand all of it, and this is what we're working on.
Yeah, and it's an example of 2 different slides here. One very detailed, and another thing you could do is kind of target your audience. This slide would be, targeted to somebody who's very technical, who's aware of your product, who wants to understand your stack, like Sirk mentioned. While the prior one might be for a kind of a more general audience, but both are very effective. Next slide, please. Business model. So once you've kind of outlined your secret sauce and the product offering, here's your chance in this slide to kind of describe your business model. How are you going to make money? Who are your customers? What kind of pricing strategy will you be working? How are you going to market the product, or how are you going to sell the product? This is really key, and this section here will probably be a chance for you to discuss what you're going to be doing and fielding a lot of questions. The slide should be as simple as possible, but focusing really on your go-to-market strategy and how you will end up monetizing your product at the end of the day. So next slide. Here's a really great example that will lead the reader or the people that you're presenting to the various stages that gets it down to the most important thing in the middle, the monetization, the money, where they're talking about commissions, they're talking about where they're going to be getting their commissions and other sources of revenue for this company, Kangarooo. So very, very simple slide, easy to read, and focuses the audience to really the message that that you're making here on your business model. Allows you to, as a presenter, to go through the different stages of your revenue model and explain it in a very clear and concise manner. Next slide, please. Here's another example for Suggest Shop, another kind of a approach saying, hey, we're going to be going through two different market segments and explain to the audience, what our sales target approach will be from a freemium model all the way to a small, middle, and large market approach. Very, very concise, very clear. Allows you to very quickly explain your sales strategy and your customer strategy very, very quickly. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's look at the market opportunity, which is the next slide. And this is kind of where, we've now laid out, what the problem is, how we are addressing the market, and how our technology and our service and our product is the winner in this space. And we've also just talked about how we're going to be going after, or what our model is of making money, right? So the next slide is the market opportunity, and this is going to be really critical information for your investors to understand, because part of it is exactly that, is how big is the market that we're going after, right? Do we have the kind of company where we have explosive growth opportunities and the revenue opportunity to match that based upon how big the market is, or are we a smaller player in a smaller space and even if we're successful, it can only grow so fast or to a certain extent. And here we kind of talk about, at least in the tech space, we use these acronyms TAM, SAM, and SOM, total available market, serviceable addressable market, and the serviceable obtainable market. And this, one good analogy would be like, for example, sushi market, right? The worldwide sushi market may be $10 billion a year. I don't know, just kind of pulling a number. But if you're opening up a sushi bar, here in San Jose, then obviously you got a much more serviceable, obtainable market. And understanding what those markets are for us as entrepreneurs, and being able to convey this information to investors is really critical, because really what we want to be able to show is we have a serviceable, obtainable market that is compelling, that we're going to start off with, and then if we can somehow infuse that information or infuse these slides with kind of this interest-piquing ideas of how the serviceable, obtainable market that we're initially starting off with grows right into the serviceable, addressable market and the total available market. Ultimately, as we grow, obviously that's going to make the investment opportunity much more compelling to investors. And so, yes, we want to show that we are focused. We have an obtainable market today. That's what we're going after initially. But we also want to just kind of let it out in the air of what the potential markets are going to be like as we grow and as we're able to increase our exposure and our markets. So let's go to the next slide. And so here's a slide for Gleamer, where it basically looks at the total available market, which is maybe the U.S. auto detailing, and then that kind of layers down to what the opportunity might be for Gleamer, if we assume that that we can get a certain percentage of the market and get a 15% transaction fee. And so this is where it says, okay, here's the entire market. This is the market that we're going after immediately. The $2 billion is the market we're going after, and then explain later on how we're going to be able to going after that market's size is going to be what we're trying to what we're trying to show on this slide. And then once we have that, then obviously we put all that together to put together a go-to-market plan. Alaa already touched upon some of these questions in the business model slide, but really now we're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of how are we acquiring customers, right? How do we understand how this market is going to go? What's the best way of going after it? What is it going to cost us, right? So are we going after advertising on Google? Or do we have a product that we're either planning on selling directly from our website or going through Amazon or other e-tailers? How are we going to advertise? And the next one about the cost to acquire customers is really critical here, right? Because this again speaks to our understanding of our customers, our understanding of the marketplace, to be able to say, look, we've got a business model here that says, this is how much we're going to have to spend in advertising, targeted advertising, Facebook ads and things of that nature. We expect to spend this much money, and for that we're going to acquire this number of customers. And so how much does it cost to acquire a customer? Obviously, if it costs $10 to acquire a customer and their lifetime value is $8, then obviously that's not a business model, right? So we need to be able to explain and understand exactly what it's going to cost. To the extent that we already have some traction, we've got sales pipelines, and understanding of how we're going to increase that pipeline, where we're going after, and any kind of detail that we already have about that data that we're already experiencing. Obviously, this is going to be a great place to talk about that. And then things like marketing leverage points and other word of mouth and viral networking and so on and so forth. Those are going to be things that we're going to want to point out to the extent that they're applicable. So here is a great high-level pictorial graphical slide that shows how this one company is going after it, right? So they're going after the enterprise market, and you can see the different ways that we're going after it through partnerships, direct sales, and with self-service subscriptions. And here's another one that talks about, a company called Kangarooo, and that the way that they are going after customer acquisitions, right? So, it at a high level, it says this is the target audience. These are the travelers that we're going after, their income status, and even in particular specific countries that we're targeting that might be interested in our service. And here you can see the three ways that we're going after this, right? That through paid ads, through social media, and through partnerships.
I'd like to kind of stress one point that Sirk mentioned. Customer acquisition costs is becoming a critical factor for investors, and where in the past they kind of gleamed over it. And obviously, if you're in a very early stage and you're still developing your product, it may not be as critical. But there's been a lot of companies that have got a lot of financing only to discover that very late in the game that it costs them a lot of money to acquire a customer, money that is far greater than the lifetime value of the customer. And in a couple of cases that I'm aware of, their IPOs were withheld or delayed because of this issue. So expect, especially if you're in the SaaS space, expect that to be a question that will come up, and to the extent that you could address it properly, I think that'll give you a big leg up. So, Sirk, that's a very important point.
Yeah, and you know, you wouldn't necessarily put all that information on these slides, but you absolutely need to understand all of those metrics, right? So, you know, as Alaa just mentioned, you know, because we work with a lot of software as a service clients, and understanding the unit metrics of the business model, and being able to defend it, right? Because it's one thing for us to say, yeah, I'm hoping to get this. I'm hoping it's going to cost me, you know, $2 to acquire a customer, and our lifetime value is, you know, $20. That's very, very, you know, you know, we need to be able to explain that, because that is going to be one of the key things that they're going to be asking about. Like, how are you going after customers? What's it going to cost you? Do you, as an entrepreneur, really understand the business model such that, you know, that you're not understating what it's going to cost or overstating what the lifetime value is? You know, so things like the customer acquisition cost, the lifetime value, churn, you know, in your customer base, all of those, the unit metric numbers of your business is really, really critical. And obviously, when you're first starting out, it's hard to know, right? So you're going to be making some assumptions along the way. Obviously, if you have some, you know, competing data or some comparable data, comparable companies that you can then you can look at, that's a good place to obviously do some research and come up with assumptions that you can at least support from other companies. But really, really, you know, have that number down cold. You know, even as a means of, you know, being able to explain that on the slide at a high level, that's great. But even if not, even if you're kind of doing it at a higher level and you want to be able to go into that kind of detail during a presentation, knowing that as you're putting these slides together is really, really critical.
So before we go to the next slide, just let's take inventory where we are. We've introduced ourselves. We've told our audience, you know, what our product is, what our secret sauce is, and how we're planning to make money, and how we're going to get customers. So now that we've covered all of that, what's the competition look like? Are we going to have a lot of resistance out there? Are we going to have a lot of competition in the marketplace? The first thing that you should never do is, no matter how ingenious your product is, never say we're unique. We do not have any competition. The minute you say that, you will lose credibility, because investors just don't believe that. So be prepared to discuss, you know, what makes your product unique and special, and the advantages that you have, and what are the ideas and differentiators that you have. But please note, it's not a new idea. Be prepared to defend why you think you're going to get better traction, why you're going to be able to leapfrog some of your competition, and be able to identify who those competitors are. This is a great chance for you to do it in a graphic format. And that graphic format will address the key points to your competitive advantage. So here's some example in the next slide, Amanda. So this is a great one. You know, it highlights the various factors, the market distribution, the online store creator, all the different items in your product, and how does that compare? And this slide kind of very graphically on the right, you know, explains that, hey, we check all the boxes, we're incredible, and we address various points of competition all in one slide. A slide like this will spur a lot of conversation, and really focus your message to the competitive landscape. I think the next slide has also a pretty good example. This is a little busier, but kind of gives you the audience a little perspective by putting your competition in quadrants and giving you an opportunity to discuss where those competitors are. Certain competitors are expensive, complex. Some other competitors are focused on usability, and really kind of allows you to differentiate your product and talk about the other solutions out there. Those other solutions in most venture-backed discussions that you will have, probably the audience will be aware of them, whether it's the companies that you're seeing here or companies that are specific to your industry. Most likely they'll be aware of them, and they might even bring up other competitors. To the extent that you are familiar with that, will again make you more credible and make your message more effective.
And Alaa, if I could just add to that and reiterate basically what you said at the top of this, because we do get questions, right, from clients who say, look, we're working on something really, really unique. No one's really doing kind of what we're doing. It's really hard to put us into a bucket with other competitors. And so this slide either becomes very, very difficult to prepare, or we're a little bit hesitant to kind of put in some of the bigger players who either are kind of touching on the fringes of what we're doing, or might potentially, or we're kind of infringing on their space, and they might become the kind of the 800-pound gorilla who puts lots of resources to it and tries to squash us when we're really out there. And to Ala's point, really, one of the things that we're trying to do here is we're trying to gain credibility, right? Ultimately, we need to earn the confidence of the investors we are pitching, because this is the maybe the second step in a long process of actually getting a check or a wire transfer from an investor into our account, right? And so all along the way, we are really trying to earn the confidence and trust of the investor, and poo-pooing or lessening the potential impact of competition just because it makes us look better on the slide is really doing ourselves a disservice. We really want to be out there and saying, look, these are really our competitors, and even maybe some others who might get into our space, but here is why we're better. Here is why we are unique, not in terms of the space that we're in, but some of the things that we're doing or the ways that we're going about doing it, which is obviously compelling to our customers. And that's, I think that's the two classic ways of doing that are these two slides, either the quadrant slide where we want to be the one up and up and to the right, or in the checkbox slide where we basically check off all the boxes of the features or benefits that our customers or this marketplace needs, and we provide all of that, and our competition doesn't.
The next slide is again a very important slide in my opinion. I can't remember a time where I was trying to introduce a company to a potential investor or a VC where the first question that came from them is, what does the team look like? Are they rock stars? It always amazes me that the more success or the more credibility a management team has had, the easier it is for that management team to raise money. It's unfortunate fact for folks who haven't had a startup before, but it's unfortunately the reality out there. So your team is going to be a critical presentation, because it explains to the potential investor who are the players that are going to make the vision that you just outlined in the previous slides happen. So you want to address, of course, the individuals, their relevant, their education, their work experience, their background, and also if you have investors prior to this pitch, this is also part of your team. It's not just the people who work on your product or work in your company, but your investors, any kind of consultants, advisors that are part of your team. Here's your chance to put it on. In very early stages, if you haven't raised any money, you may not have a team. You may not have, a vice president of engineering or a CTO or a VP of marketing or or any of that. Don't be afraid to list the key advisors or key consultants or anybody that will lend credibility to your vision and to your presentation. Um, uh, it's an important element, even though it sounds very simple. It's not just saying listing the folks on your team, but explaining why they're going to make a difference. Next slide, please. Here's a great slide. It's very personal. It shows all the folks that are critical to your team, what their role is, and just small bullet points of what they're going to be working on and where they came from. So they have a little bit of pedigree. A very simple slide. Somebody could scan it and elicit conversation or provide assurance that you have a good team working on your vision. Next slide.
Sirk? Okay. Yeah. So obviously we need to look at financials, and now we're getting into areas where Alaa and I, they're near and dear to our hearts. Really understanding what the financial projections are and being able to portray them in a manner that is, that obviously is advantageous to us. But also that tells a good story, and we're able to back up, right? So that's really the ultimate key. And so some of the key metrics, and of course every company has different set of key metrics. But as most of you, well, many of you may know, really financial projections. It's all about the assumptions, right? We can make the numbers, and we can manipulate spreadsheets to put, to make it, come up with whatever end product that we want. But it's really about what are the underlying assumptions that is driving the model. And in most cases, it's literally, for like a 3-year projection or something of that nature, you could probably boil it down to 5 to 10 major assumptions that are going to drive 90 to 95% of the model. Right, and so understanding what those are, understanding what the drivers are that's driving the model is critical. These are obviously some things that you're going to want to take into consideration. The customers, how many customers we're going to have. When are we going to win them? How much are they paying per month or as a one-time? How do we go after that? Obviously, things like total revenue, total cost of goods sold, total expenses, over time, and understanding, what the assumptions are behind those numbers, is going to drive this model. And then the final thing I'll say before we look at a couple of examples, before we do that is, clearly, this is going to be spreadsheet driven. The actual model is going to be spreadsheet driven, but we obviously don't want to be showing, a line item by line item P&L and the balance sheet of what that's going to look like over time. For 2 reasons. One is because it just doesn't portray the information we want, and secondly, it's way too early to be able to do it at that level of detail. And so, having said that, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Here's one, and again, we kind of say, even this may look a little bit busy, but what it does is it highlights, several key numbers, right, that we're trying to project. We're not looking at a detailed P&L, but we are saying that this is how much in total revenue that we expect to earn over the next several months. This is the total of expenses, and this is basically how much we're going to earn or lose in given quarters. And then maybe more importantly is just taking a look at the graphical chart of it, where in addition to the headcount that we're planning on hiring over the next several quarters, this is what the total revenue and expenses look like. And in this case, you can see, for example, in FY 2009, that we're expecting a pretty big jump in expenses as we're really going after the marketplace. So again, just an example. I think that there are better ways of presenting data, but again, it's going to depend on what you want to show that makes the most advantage to us. And this one's I like this one a little bit better. as well. But and then again, you can kind of see, some key assumptions, right? So this is, the number of payments that are being processed per day, shows the growth rate of that, and again looks at some high level numbers, the revenue, the EBITDA, which is the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, which is a key number. Basically, what that shows is kind of like a cash flow based, or the amount of money that we make before we look at non-cash items or non-operating items like interest and taxes and so on and so forth. So again, this kind of shows how we are going to do. I also like this one in this case where we show a best case, base case, or expected case, and a worst case. It's kind of, I think what we want to show here is, what we think we can do, but also kind of leave it open that, this makes some assumptions about our growth rate that we may be able to even do better than this. But even as we talked about kind of what goes on the slides, but obviously this takes into account, right, putting together the financial projections is one, and again I stress that this is something that Alaa and I do regularly. There are a lot of founders who have experience with financial plans and putting together models. I mean, they're very, very good at it. If you're not, we highly suggest you talk with others, and not us, but other people who are familiar and experienced in putting together models, because there's one thing that will kill a presentation like this, right, is to put together a set of financials that looks good when you look at it, but that aren't supported, right, that aren't supported by all the other slides that we've put in before this, that looks at market size or potential, or go to market. All of that all those assumptions have to tie into this financial model, and it has to be believable, and we have to be able to back it up. The final thing I'll say about this, because the question gets asked a lot, is okay, well, how aggressive do we want to be, right? Do we want to put up numbers here that are really, really pie in the sky optimistic, like everything has to work out perfectly and we can't have any setbacks, or do we want it to be more realistic? And I usually say you kind of want to be somewhere in the middle, right? Obviously, we don't want to have pie in the sky kind of projections, but at the same time, we can't be modeling out all the things that can go wrong and all the reasons why it's going to take longer to get to revenue, because ultimately, one of the first things that investors do when they get a set of financial projections from entrepreneurs is they lop off the revenue by 30%, 50%, 75%, as a means of making a decision as to whether it's something that they want to invest in or not, because they know that entrepreneurs are going to be relatively aggressive. So we need to be able to back up the data with the assumptions. They can't be completely out of line with one another, but we absolutely want to show that we are optimistic. We think highly of the market opportunity. We think highly of ourselves as entrepreneurs and of our team to be able to meet the market's needs, and that we're going to be successful. And our financial model should project that.
Yep. Sirk, I'd like to just add a couple of points. This is probably the trickiest part of your presentation, because financials could be very, very detailed, and you definitely don't want to get into the minutiae. You don't want to put in there your full set of financials, income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow statement. You don't want to put in your revenue assumptions or revenue model in the detail in the presentation. However, the overall message, and that will show to the investors that you've thought about the key financial points. For example, I see a lot of say SaaS companies, we're going back to this again, where they show the revenue as the subscription revenue that they're planning to win in various cycles, or not the GAAP revenue. That's fine, and I think in the proper stage, that number or that set of projections may work. But as long as you understand the difference between this is not the contracts that you're going to close, this is the revenue you're going to recognize, so you could present that to the reader and have that answer if the investor or the potential investor asks. Another kind of point is unrealistic trends. Very few investors will look at your 5-year revenue and expense and say, okay, based on that, I'm going to invest in a company. But they will look at trends, and they like to kind of poke holes in certain things where, oh, your revenue is going to grow by 400%, yet you're showing no growth in your operating expenses. Why is that? So just understanding kind of the visual and explaining the trends and the underlying assumptions that that kind of worked into the financial model is important. And that kind of goes back to the underlying message of keeping things simple. Keeping your financial present slides simple is also important, because that there's a lot of detail that could get lost in these presentations, and you don't want to be covering them in a 20-minute presentation. I always like to tell a presenter or an entrepreneur to, if you have these detailed questions that come up, to just very simply say, I have a detailed model. I'm happy to go over all of the assumptions with you offline. And
Yeah,
I think that's a very credible answer.
absolutely.
Just a quick question, if you don't mind. Somebody's wondering if you could explain the y-axis on this chart that we have here.
The y-axis is revenue.
Perfect.
But it's just dollars. And in fact, I actually, I think this may be the EBIT. If I'm looking at, this was just a sample. Obviously, that it doesn't correlate to the annual revenue number. Maybe it relates to the EBITDA on the expected case. Kind of what it looks like. Okay, and then we're kind of now closing it out. We've kind of made the case, and the last two things we're going to do is we're going to tell them where we're at, what we've accomplished to date, and basically how much money we need and what we're going to be using it for. So first, we kind of start with the current status. Okay, so what have we done, right? So are we going after a series? Are we going after a seed round of financing? And this is for early investors, and we really, up until now, we just had some either an individual investment or a couple of founders that are basically working without salary, and basically putting together some code, right? Or are we going after a Series A or Series B where we have some accomplishments, we have revenue, we're already generating revenue, our product is getting honed down. So obviously, where are we to date, right? What are the timelines? If you can actually put together a timeline of things that you've already accomplished, the things that we've already accomplished, that's really, really great. And obviously, the more that we've accomplished on less money, the better we're going to look, to investors. But where are we today? And then secondly, the use of funds, right? What have we used money on up until now? Has it been on product development? Has it been on trying to go after customers? Has it been on salary? What have we been using the funds for up until now? And obviously, what we're planning on using in the future. So here's one that basically says, this is what we've done. We did a soft launch in 2016, and maybe we're kind of now in the 2017 range, and this is kind of where we expect to be. So this is one that talks a little bit about the revenue, right, and where we are in terms of how much revenue that we've generated. It may be we may not be in a place where we're talking more about revenue. Maybe we're in a stage of the company where we're talking about accomplishments with regards to product development and R&D and patents, other work that we've done, as we're kind of trying to get the product done. Or maybe we are in a stage where we're now going after customers, and we can talk about how many customers we've already won and what kind of revenue we're generating up until now. And then finally, and this one, ask for the money, right? So you've kind of made a very, very compelling point up until now about what we're trying to do, what we're going after. This is where we ask for the money, right? How much are we trying to raise? What kind of valuation are we looking for? And ultimately, what we're going to be spending it on, right? And that's a key one. We really focus on this last bullet point here of milestone spending. And really it comes down to kind of, as we grow, we're going to be raising, in most cases for tech startups, we're going to be raising multiple rounds of financing. And what we really want to do is with each raise of financing, we're trying to use that money to achieve certain milestones, which ultimately will allow us to raise more money as we grow at higher and higher valuations, right? So understanding what those key milestones are and understanding how much money we're asking for and how that's going to get us to these milestones that we're going after is really, really the key thing here, and also kind of hones us in on where we're trying to go. And so let's just look at kind of the classic example. Here you go. Here's a quick slide that says we're looking for a seed round of financing of $750,000. We think that our company is worth 2.8 million. Obviously, there's we have backup to suggest that. Clearly, this is not to say that they're going to come and say, okay, great, we're going to cut you a check of 750,000 at 2.8 million. But at least it sets the foundation of kind of what our expectation is, right? So that we can have additional discussions with investors about that. And obviously, that number is subject to change and negotiation. And then this is kind of what we're what we're going to use the $750,000 for. In this case, we're building out a enterprise sales channel, as well as a channel for integration and partnerships. And that this is the milestone that we want to achieve. We want to deploy to 25 new enterprise customers at $500,000 in sales. And so again, so the message here should be, okay, can we, so if we give this entrepreneur $750,000, right, do we have confidence that they're going to be able to achieve these milestones, be able to hire the people that we need to hire, and be able to deploy to these new enterprise customers? Because then the next step in logic is, if we're able to do that, then when we raise our Series A round of financing, we're going to be in such great position. We're going to have sales. We're going to have generating revenue. We've got a certain number of customers, and being able to raise money in Series A at a much greater valuation is what the takeaway should be, right, from this presentation. And I mean, this is one. There's probably lots of conclusions to have, but one of the things that we suggest is we get mired in the detail, right? We think about all these things in our heads as we're putting these bullet points and charts and graphs on the slides. But understand that initially this is going to be being sent out to potential investors without us being able to talk about them and explain them. And so being able to show this to to close people around you that can give you feedback on how does this come across, is obviously we want the feedback, and we want to be able to go and hone the message. We also should be prepared to kind of have multiple slides at different levels of complexity for each of these things, depending on who we're sending the slide set out to. But at this point, hopefully the message is pretty clear in the slide set, and it's hopefully enough to draw the attention and the curiosity and interest level of potential investors who are going to be able to see this, so that they invite you for a presentation.
Great. So we do have a couple of questions to go through. The first one is, given the timing challenges of capital raise, wouldn't it be better to just number the month from funding rather than be specific about how the year will be with the top line?
Sure, sure, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then
agree.
he has another part of his question, which is, if all the investment capital comes in later than expected, then you are not going to be able to deploy the capital to gather the projected top line. I don't
I'm
know the
not.
question.
Yeah, I'm,
That's
I'm, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think that's kind of similar to the other original, right? Whether you say that you're starting or we're expected to close in January, and therefore this is kind of a full year thing where you put it, put financial projections into kind of annual, right? Year one, year two, year three. I think that that's a good way of going. I think that most entrepreneurs they have because of the fact that when they're putting together these slides, they have a timeline, right, of what their expectation is in terms of the fundraise and when it's going to close. And you might, obviously, make some assumptions about that. But usually, like we're not in a stage where, hey, listen, we're putting together this pitch deck here in June of 2018. We're expecting to kind of go through the fundraise, and we're hoping to close by, let's say, January, February, right, of next year, which is not uncommon. But obviously, we're not in a position where this thing's going to drag out for a year beyond that, right? Because we're not, we're probably not going to be around if we're not able to fundraise for 18 months.
Right.
Also, a point to your presentation should be always an evolving presentation. So keep updating it as events in your company change. And that goes with the financial projections as well.
Next question. I don't know if we can answer this quickly. It might be a look at our YouTube, but he's asking, how do you write a financial projection for a startup company?
This is Sirk mentioned that a lot of entrepreneurs have kind of financial background, either an MBA or whatever, and to the extent that you have that and have familiarity with with the process, then by all means go ahead and start it. And however, if you do not have any experience with financial projections, money well spent to go and seek help from somebody like Early Growth or other professionals who have done it in the past. I think the value that you'll be getting from that guidance is well worth it. It'll not just help you with your presentation to potential investors, but it may help you operationally in your business or your thinking by prioritizing certain things, especially when you get your thoughts down to a financial projection. So to the extent that you have a background in it, go ahead and start the process, but still consult with somebody who's familiar with, who's an expert in it or who has done it in the past prior to presenting. If you have no experience in doing it, seek guidance very early on. Short of that, the things to gather would be really the key elements. If you're in a very early stage and are looking at a financial projection that involves creating a product, it may start with what are the variables involved with creating that product. Who do you have to hire? The cost elements. Who are the consultants? What kind of hardware? What kind of software that you have to get? All the different elements that involve the cost or revenue in the short term. Kind of get those down on a spreadsheet or on some kind of outline. And to the extent that you do not have the financial framework or the financial background, take that information to a consultant to help you with it.
Yeah, I'll add this, and I'm not sure if the question was related to the actual preparing of the financial plan, like in the actual modeling of it, or whether the question was, well, how do I understand my business, or my opportunity enough at this stage, at a really early stage, to even understand kind of what the unit metrics are going to be, or how I'm going to be how I'm going to go after customers. If the question is the latter, then that's obviously stuff that as you're kind of going, you're going to learn, right? You're going to learn, and you need to take that learning and put them down on paper in these slides. Clearly you're not putting together a pitch deck on day one of your company saying, hey, I got this great idea, I'm going to put together a pitch deck and raise $3 million to get started. Usually you have some understanding of the space that you're going after. You and a co-founder may have certain interest in an area and really going after it, or you've already got some experience in the industry that you feel is not being serviced properly, or that you think there's a different way of doing things. So clearly, you should have some amount of information and data that will help you to understand the marketplace, so that you can start putting together these financial projections. But to echo Alaa's point, you really should speak to someone who has experience from not only putting together a financial model, but someone with the experience to be able to ask the key critical questions, right? To be able for you to be able to bounce back and forth. Okay, this is kind of what I'm thinking. These are the people that I think I'm going to need to hire over the next 6 to 12 months, and so let's model that out. This is the marketplace I'm going after, and this is how I'm planning on doing it. And for someone to have enough experience putting together financial models and seeing not only the preparation of the financial models, but seeing then what happens to the model afterwards, right? As the company grows, that person should be able to, bounce the right questions to you, right? Like, does it make sense for us to be hiring these kinds of people at this stage, right? We're saying that we're going to be hiring salespeople on day one. Does that make sense? Or maybe we do need to start, spending money immediately on kind of, market segmentation and understanding really what we're going after. So those kinds of critical questions and the answers to those questions is going to drive those major assumptions that's going to go into the model, into the financial model, that's going to obviously in the end going to spit out the numbers that we're going to be presenting on these slides.
Thank you. We have one more quick question, which I think will be pretty quick. I know we're running a little bit over, but just curious, people have been getting different views on what the investor wants to see first, the product or the market opportunity slide. I'm wondering if you guys have advice on a rule of thumb to follow for which should come first.
Alaa, do you have any?
Yes, I think it kind of depends what stage you're at. I think if you've been in revenue mode for a while, say you've raised an A round of financing and you have a year or two of revenue, then I think focusing on the product may not be the best thing to lead with. The market opportunity might be a better start. If you're very, very early in your company cycle, absolutely focusing on the product, the differentiator, the special sauce, that kind of thing is what you should be leading. The idea you should be leading with before the market opportunity, because you need to sell that first. If you've already been in the market for a while, the assumption is that you've had a little bit of traction, and the product has kind of proven itself.
Yeah, I'll echo that as well. So really, there's no hard and fast answer to this, right? It kind of depends on each individual viewpoint. But think about the entire slide set, the entire pitch deck as one product that you're going to be sending out to potential investors, even before you have a meeting with them, right? And so you need to capture their interests. And so what's the best way of doing that, right? Is the best way of doing that, and you want to do it early, right? You don't want to go through 10 or 12 slides, of hum-de-dum-dum, followed by a final slide that says, here's our selling point. You need to capture the interest, pretty much as quickly as possible, and try to hold that interest throughout, the slide set. And so, what's the most compelling thing to talk about, and put it out there as early as you can. So, again, to echo Alaa's point, if it's about product at this point, then let's talk about that. If it's about traction and revenue generation and how big the market is, let's talk about that first.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will be sending a follow-up email to everybody with the slides and with the slide deck. And thank you so much to Alaa and Sirk. This was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.